car companies had this idea that, hey, we know how to do manufacturing. Well, you don't know how to do electric vehicle manufacturing. What I used to say at the time is that if you're not in version 2 or 3, your cars by 2020, it may be too late. These cost curves are like gravity. They're very predictable. We know that lithium-ion batteries since the 1990s had been improving at about 14-16% per year in cost and capability. The US EIA predicted that by 2035, there would be something like 140 EVs, not 140,000, 140 EVs sold by 2035. And here I was predicting that it would be all over by 2030, right? And this is in 2010. Even something like over-the-air, updates, which Tesla had done 10 years ago, right? Yes. I mean, even those simple things, folks are starting to do just now.
In this video, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Tony Seba, a human being whose colossal balls are matched in size only by his brain. Tony Seba has been making accurate, long-range, absurd-sounding predictions now for well in excess of a decade. These astonishingly accurate predictions at the time have sounded absolutely insane. It's been laughed out of the room, laughed off the internet, mocked and ridiculed, especially by the so-called experts. Yet every step of the way, Tony's predictions have been on the fucking money. I'm featuring some highlights from an excellent episode of the Fully Charged podcast featuring Tony Seba. There's a link in the description to watch the full interview. Highly recommended. We're just going to be focusing in this video on a few key highlights relating to electric vehicles, declining cost curves, the massive, catastrophic disruption of the legacy automotive industry, and why the vast majority of today's automotive manufacturers are completely and utterly fucked. While we're on the subject of disruption, I can confidently say that if you join Patreon with the card in the corner or the link in the pinned comment, your panties are all but guaranteed to be disrupted after I say something that causes you to get triggered, butthurt, mad, or, amazingly, think. I'm not sure this is the best sales pitch for my exclusive Patreon content, but it's the most honest one, so make of that what you will.
These cost curves are like gravity. They're very predictable. I mean, we know that solar PV, for instance, improves at about 11% per year, and it has done so, improves in cost and capability since about 1970. We know that lithium-ion batteries since the 1990s had been improving at about 14-16% per year in cost and capability. So once we understand those cost curves, once they settle in the marketplace, then essentially they're like gravity. And so in 2010, it was pretty obvious that solar was going to eat all of energy. And I made the then insane prediction that by 2020, solar PV would be cheaper without subsidies than coal, than anything else, essentially. Right, gas, coal, fossil, nuclear, and all that stuff. And at the time, it sounded insane. But like I said, it's all based on science. It's all based on the cost curve.
The key takeaway here is that these cost curves are reliably predictable. Keywords here, reliably predictable. We can reliably predict future costs based on these declining curves. This is what enables people like Tony Seba more than a decade ago to make what at the time sound like absolutely absurd predictions. Fast forward a decade or so, these predictions turn out to be on the fucking money. Why? Reliably predictable. I don't want to labor the point here, but it's so fucking important. Embarrassing as it is, in 2023, there are still a huge number of skeptics. In fact, I think the majority of people who think they know anything about the future of the automotive market or the energy industry, the vast majority of people, whether they're a Wall Street stock analyst, a talking head in the finance media, a retail investor, a casual observer, an armchair Einstein, or anyone in between. The clearest example of this are the publicly stated goals of legacy automotive manufacturers, most of which still think that they will be producing and selling internal combustion engine vehicles beyond 2030. Mark my words, they will not. And the reason that I'm so confidently able to predict this is because, unlike many people who seem to rely on their intuition and their emotions, their feelings, I'm leveraging the wonderful fact that these costs continue to predictably decline, just like the law of gravity. The implications are that over time, as global lithium-ion battery and electric vehicle production scales up, the cost of the most expensive parts of these vehicles, the batteries, the computer, and the overall product itself, with very few moving parts, still very early on in its mass production. In other words, there's a lot of innovation just in terms of manufacturing these things at scale. the cost of electric vehicles will precipitously and predictably decline over time. My best guess is that by the end of this decade, a company like Tesla could produce a vehicle just like today's Model 3 or Model Y for about half of today's cost. This really matters.
Same thing with lithium-ion batteries. Same thing with, I did a cost curve, 20-year cost curve for EVs was around that 2010.
Yeah.
And it looked like by 2030, essentially, EVs were going to disrupt all of internal combustion engine, the whole industry.
Yeah.
And that was 20 years out. And that was, by the way, a time when the US EIA predicted that by 2035, there would be something like 140 EVs, not 140,000, 140 EVs sold by 2035. And here I was predicting that it would be all over by 2030, right? And this is in 2010.
It's important that we take a moment to discuss this. Tony Seba, making 20-year long-range predictions that sounded absolutely insane at the time, turned out to be on the money. Meanwhile, the so-called experts self-immolating with their truly embarrassing predictions. Back around 2010, we just heard here from Tony, some so-called experts predicting by 2035 there would be 140 electric vehicles, not 140,000, 140. And the reason I raise this is not to just mock and ridicule these dumb faces who call themselves experts and are anything but. It's to underscore the point that most people, most companies, most executives, most leaders rely on expert forecasts, expert opinions, expert consensus. When I say expert, I mean expert. Legacy automotive manufacturers have been relying on these supposed experts. Governments have been relying on these supposed experts. The fossil fuel industry has been relying on these so-called experts. Very few, if any, companies, other than Tesla, in the automotive industry, instead relied on their own fucking brains. Predictably declining costs. Keywords there, predictably, so we can predict. It really is bizarre to me, of course. It's not like there's any other recent examples of people relying on expert opinions, expert forecasts, expert warnings, expert suggestions about anything else that they were completely wrong about. And in totally unrelated matters, remember, it's for your protection, not our quarterly profits. And now the unfortunate consequence of being a brain-dead moron and or relying on brain-dead experts, which probably means you are still just a brain-dead moron, is by the time you realize that these expert forecasts are unreliable and catastrophically wrong, it's a little bit too late. This is where legacy automotive manufacturers find themselves today. I think the penny has started to drop, although I don't think most of these companies realize just how quickly the EV transition is happening. But make no mistake, behind closed doors, they're in full fucking panic mode. They've realized they're the better part of a decade too late to this party. Tesla's lead now is unassailable. These companies are screwed, and it just won't end well. Yet as I record this, if you were to look at the stock price of companies like Ford, Government Motors, Volkswagen, Toyota, it's as if not a single person in the stock market realizes what's going on. If they did, these companies would all be trading for approximately $0 per share.
Why did both Google and Apple, right, come up with a smartphone around 2007? Why not 2004 or 2010? That's because all the technologies that made a $600 smartphone possible converged that year, 2007. So that was the year when that disruption was going to open up, right? So when there is a convergence, a whole bunch of companies come into the space. Entrepreneurs see the new opportunities that open up. Incumbents don't see it, but entrepreneurs do, right? Because incumbents are in their linear, kind of reductive view of the world.
Once again, Tony Seba absolutely on the fucking money. Great example of this would be the dipshits over at Toyota, who until recently, and they probably still are, I don't even know, they've recently shit-canned their president/CEO, grandson of the founder of the company, always a red flag. Why are you in the job? It's your surname, got nothing to do with your ability to lead, your competence, your fitness for the role. Nope, your grandfather started the company, therefore you should be running it. Unbelievable. Until recently, Toyota, the incumbent of all incumbents in the automotive industry, were publicly saying they still don't know whether or not consumers want EVs, making a bunch of excuses as to why they're not viable and explaining why they're investing in 4 independent propulsion technologies: internal combustion engine, hybrid, aka internal combustion engine with a little battery, hydrogen fuel cells, and electric vehicles. They made these statements as recently as a few months ago. They still do not see what's on the horizon. They still can't get it. Literally, the world's largest automotive manufacturer by unit volume still does not see the EV disruption happening before their very eyes.
That equilibrium And so they come into the space, they, basically build a whole bunch of products different, but within the same idea. And at some point, so think about Tesla in 2010, for instance, or, the number of solar companies that came into the world in 2009 or 10. That's because we saw a convergence. They enter the market. They keep improving their products until, so think of 2012 when Tesla came up with the Model S at $120,000, right? But they kept improving it in cost and capabilities, right? So, that's what the EV disruption, and we can get to that, is what I call a disruption from above. That's when the market starts with superior but more expensive products. But because of the cost curves of the different components, and in this case, batteries being the most expensive, essentially because of that is improving in cost and capability, it may take several years before they rupture the market. The rupture happens and boom, essentially at that point, the beginning of the S-curve happens. So folks may not see adoption happening quickly, but a company like Tesla in general, the EV market had been growing at 40, 50, 60% per year. But because that was below the 1% market penetration, folks don't see it, even though it's improving exponentially.
So to illustrate Tony's point here, on screen now, we're looking at historical EV adoption globally. Now I'm going to read the figures here and you guys might start to notice something. As a percent of all new vehicles sold, back in 2011, electric vehicles represented 0.07% of the market. That's not 0.7, that is 0.07. In 2012, 0.09% of the market. Barely any change. In 2013, 0.16% of the market. Now that still sounds like absolutely nothing. From 0.7% to 0.16%, the span of just 2 years, we saw a doubling. But because the numbers are so small, no one paid attention. In 2014, 0.27% of the market. Another doubling from just the year prior. So we've seen a doubling over 2 years and then an acceleration, a doubling over a single year. 2015, EVs representing 0.41% of the market. Not quite, another doubling. The following year, 0.59% of the market in 2016, just over 0.5%. And by 2017, almost 1% at 0.97% of the market. From 2012 at 0.09% of the market to 2017, a 10x in adoption, yet still 2017, not even 1% of the global market. At this point in time, aside from Tesla and a few exceptions in China, no one saw the writing on the wall. Oh, not even 1%, bro, who cares? But just let me show you what's happened since 2017, where EVs were essentially 1% of the global market. 2018, 1.7% and almost doubling. 2019, 2.13%. 2020, 3.27%. 2021, 6.65%. 2022, over 10%. So from 2017 until 2022, we have seen another 10x. But because humans don't understand exponential growth intuitively, after all, for our entire evolutionary existence, until the advent of technology, there were no examples of exponential growth anywhere. Human beings cannot intuitively understand exponential growth. This is why it's so important, and as Tony points out, to be able to rely on the predictive power of declining cost curves. Because if you use your gut feel, your intuition, what you think might, that doesn't make sense, your brain just simply cannot comprehend it. Let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, we've seen two 10x's here in the span of approximately 5 years each. EV adoption today, over 10%. So, spoiler alert, one more 10x, which we've seen two happen in the span of 5 years each previously. One more of these 10x's. Who knows how long it takes? Maybe around 5 years? Who knows? One more 10x and EVs represent 100% of the new vehicle market. We're one 10x away. The last two 10x's each taking around half a decade. Yet there are automotive manufacturers today still publicly thinking and stating that they're going to be producing and selling internal combustion engine vehicles well beyond 2030. The only question I have for these automotive manufacturers is, one, what are they smoking? And two, can I have a hit?
If you grow, say, twice 2x every 2 years, you double every 2 years, and you start at 1%, how many more doublings do you need before you get to 80 or 90%, right? So 1, 2, right? 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, over, right? So you don't need that many doublings. But before 1 or 2 or 3%, the market just doesn't pay attention. They say, it's going to be, decades and so on and so forth. And
once again, Tony's right, and this is a very important point. It's 2023, and there are still automotive manufacturers today who have not understood this, who do not get this, who have plans to still be producing vehicles that nobody's going to be buying. Years after, nobody's buying them anymore. What's that saying? You can't fix stupid?
Told me about, which was from 2010. But what organization was that from? You did mention it, but I'm not familiar with them. Yes. Who suggested there'd be 140 electric cars or something, right?
Right. That was the United States Department of Energy,
right?
The EIA, right? The Energy Information Agency,
wow.
Right? And they made that prediction in 2010, right?
Right.
And the fact is, at the time there were no EVs, right?
No.
I think Tesla had produced 1,000 EVs or whatever.
1,000 roadsters, yeah.
Yeah. But look, they already made 1,000 cars. It could not go down to 130, right?
Yes.
Did they really think it was going to go down from there? That didn't make any sense.
Imagine being one of the supposed experts involved in this embarrassing prediction. Tesla's already made 1,000 plus electric vehicles, and you're forecasting 15 years after that point into the future. It's going to be less. What planet are these people on? Now, there's a brilliant word that would perfectly describe these folks, every single one of these morons. However, I might get cancelled, so I'm not going to say it. But they are all fill in the blank.
What I call phase change disruption, right? So if you think about even now, many folks are looking at the EV disruption as a one-to-one substitution, where, if you have an ICE vehicle, you sell it and you buy an EV, right? And at some point in 2030, we're going to replace everything and we're going to have 100 million EVs produced every year. But in fact, that is not what's going to happen. If you look at, for instance, the case of the smartphone, or actually, let's go back 120 years to the horses and the cars, right? So at the time, just like today, analysts see EVs as a one-to-one substitution, saw the car as a one-to-one substitution for the horse, right? But of course, we know that they were not a one-to-one substitute. Cars by 1908 the Ford Model T, for instance, was 10 times more powerful than the horse. It could drive 10 times further than the horse. It could carry 10 times more load than the horse, and so on, right? So it was a 10x disruption all around. And what ended up happening, and yes, that disruption took, 15 years to happen in America. But the idea of phase change is that everything changes. The new system is not the old system minus or plus, right?
The dude's right, and the implications of this go both ways. One, the products themselves, electric vehicles, completely transformative, completely disruptive. They are not a one-for-one replacement of internal combustion engine vehicles. Everything is going to change. And now to flip things. The number of times I've heard a supposed expert, mostly on Wall Street, and just for the record, the polar opposite of an expert, a literal fucking moron, make claims to the effect of, well, Tesla's selling vehicles now, but the competition is coming. Brilliant examples of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we hear statements claiming that as soon as a legacy automotive manufacturer just decides they're going to start making electric vehicles, they can just press a button and make electric vehicles, because electric vehicles are internal combustion engine vehicles, but they have a battery. No, they're completely different technologies. Software reigns supreme. Thermally managing batteries, integrating the batteries, it's a whole other ballgame. This is why we haven't seen legacy automotive manufacturers even come close to producing any, even slightly compelling electric vehicles to date. It's been years they've been trying to catch up to Tesla. They can't figure this shit out. There are still essentially zero automotive manufacturers globally doing over-the-air updates a decade after Tesla figured this stuff out. Not 1 year later, a decade later. And when we do see these companies attempt to produce compelling electric vehicles with an equivalent sized battery pack to a Tesla vehicle, they cannot achieve even close to the same range. Additionally, they cannot compete with Tesla on price performance. At the same price point, Tesla's making 25+% gross automotive margins on a 300+ mile range vehicle. A competing company is losing money selling a vehicle for a comparable price, not making 25%, losing money They still can't compete on range, features, or functionality. This illustrates the fact that these are not the same thing. Despite the fact that externally, an electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine vehicle look similar, the similarities are surface level only. I made the example years ago on this channel in some of my earliest videos. Expecting a legacy automotive manufacturer to be able to produce compelling, profitable electric vehicles at scale is like expecting a Michelin star chef to become a world-class ballerina. I mean, it could happen, it's possible, but Jesus, dude, I would not be betting on it, let alone expecting it to take place.
The car did not just disrupt transportation, it disrupted everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it disrupted, war. It disrupted where we live, how we date, right?
Yeah.
Where we work, how we work, right? It pretty much defined geopolitics in the 20th century because the car needed, it didn't need hay, it needed right, gasoline. And so suddenly petroleum became a big thing, right? So war, geopolitics, and so on in the 20th century was a direct implication or indirect implication of the car. Yes. And that is a phase change disruption, right? Everything changes. There is a new system in transportation that has new rules, new dynamics, new patterns, new metrics. And so that means that it would be very unusual for the incumbents to actually succeed in the new system.
Fancy that. It appears that Tony and I agree on this particular point. I think what he just said is the vast majority of legacy automotive manufacturers are going bankrupt before the decade ends. You can fucking count on it. I think that's what he said. That's what I've been saying anyway.
That's one thing. And it's very difficult also for incumbents and legacy folks, whether it's in government or industry, to see what's coming, right? Because it's a totally new system and so on and so forth. So that is one of the key ideas that I have brought over the last few years, which is the idea of phase change disruption. Right. The idea that to be, clear that, we start with a caterpillar, right? That's the ICE vehicle. Yeah. And what emerges on the other end is a butterfly. Right. And a butterfly is not a clean caterpillar, right? It's just not, right? No. So the folks that are looking at many of these disruptions, like solar, wind, and battery, or electric vehicles, and so on, as a clean, just cleaner version of the old, are getting it totally wrong, right? Yeah. Because think of the new system as a caterpillar. Yeah. With new rules and new dynamics and so on. And the caterpillar is not a butterfly, and more than that, right? To be clear, a butterfly is not a caterpillar with wings.
Yes.
As Tony points out, we are seeing a phase change disruption here. Electric vehicles are not internal combustion engine vehicles with a battery. In other words, a butterfly is not a caterpillar with wings. Yet this mistake continues to be made. It's got windows, doors, and wheels. It's just the same as an ICE car, right? Wrong. It's been 10 fucking years, in fact more than 10 years, since Tesla first began doing over-the-air software updates for their computers on wheels, aka their butterflies. And a decade later, there's no other automotive manufacturer who's consistently doing over-the-air updates. These companies erroneously assumed, we can just stick some wings on our ICE vehicles and suddenly we're making EVs, right? Wrong. Brilliantly said.
And I just wondered whether you've had direct conversations or communication with people who are in positions of control and influence in established automotive industry, because it's fascinating to see this painful transition they're all trying to go through. And I know you discussed Toyota recently, and it is an extraordinary convulsions these companies are going through. And I mean, I've followed Volkswagen very closely. They some of them are really trying hard, but I'm constantly like quietly chewing my fist in the background as I hear them kind of, are they going to survive? And then you see, this is another topic for us, but the Chinese cars, I'm in Australia, it is full of Chinese cars already, and they're Chinese electric cars coming here by the literal load, and people love them. They're really well-made, good electric cars. And they're from companies that never made ICE cars. As you're saying, it's a completely different proposition. But yeah,
Yes,
but how have they reacted?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been invited to speak several, conventional auto companies and also with oil companies.
Yeah,
So, and a lot of these conversations and presentations and so on, of course, are, private and non-disclosure and so
yeah,
on. But absolutely, I mean, I've spoken with some of the largest car makers in the world and also oil companies in the world. So,
right.
many of them get it.
Now, this is quite the bombshell. Tony Seba admitting that he has actually met with some of the world's largest automotive manufacturers and they are aware of what's happening. How recently he met with them and which automotive manufacturers, we'll never know. However, Tony ain't done. Pay very close attention to what Tony's about to say. After just mentioning, yes, I have been meeting with some of the world's largest automotive manufacturers and they do know what's happening, he also has this to say.
Yeah. And but the truth is that it's really hard for, a legacy company, especially a successful legacy company, to make a transformation, to transform itself into a butterfly. It's just difficult. Because it's not just the technology, right? I mean, the technology is not really that difficult. It's culture. It's culture. It's manufacturing. Manufacturing, a lot of car companies had this idea that, hey, we know how to do manufacturing. Well, you don't know how to do electric vehicle manufacturing.
So notice what just happened. Previously, Tony disclosed that he'd met with some of the world's largest automotive manufacturers. He's raised the alarm, and they can hear the alarm, yet in the next breath, he goes on to say, but they're basically fucked because it's close to impossible for an incumbent to adapt and change, even if they know they need to change. And it's not just the technology, but also the culture. And this is quite important. Many of these companies have now been alerted to the iceberg they're headed directly toward. However, knowing they're headed directly for an iceberg and adjusting course in time, two separate things. And it appears most legacy automotive manufacturers are simply going to be unable to adjust course. It's already over. And now we just wait and watch this play out. Rest in fucking peace, the legacy automotive industry.
Right? Yeah. You may know how to do, ICE vehicle manufacturing, but, what I used to say at the time is that if you're not in version 2 or 3, your cars by 2020, it may be too late, right? Because there are so many, no pun intended, moving parts.
Curious. So back in the day, years ago, Tony Seba was saying that if these companies don't already have their 3rd generation electric vehicle underway and in production by around 2020, they're fucked. Last I checked, it's 2023 now, and most legacy automotive manufacturers today are on Gen 1, if that. So if Tony's past statements are correct, given the fact that most of these companies, in fact, almost none of them have made it to Gen 3 by 2023, let alone 2020, I think what he said is that they're completely and utterly fucked. He's right, by the way.
That you may miss it. And also, again, it's the idea of a phase change disruption. This is not, a one-to-one substitution where you're going to keep your old, value chain. This is going to be a totally new value chain. And by the way, EVs are computers on wheels.
Yeah.
Right? They're not just the old ICE vehicle, minus, the ICE plus the battery. They are computers on wheels. And so you're going to need to acquire and develop software skills that you don't have, right? And so, you need to be in, a version 2 or 3 by 2020. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be, it may well be too late. And
it may well be too late. Tony may well be right.
But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I did speak with several, OEMs and oil companies and so on.
Yeah. I mean, I have discussed it with, I'm sure, much lower level people. But it's been interesting that on an individual level, you can absolutely see that the people there, I mean, they're involved in that industry. They talk about it all the time. It's their job and they do get it. But then you see on a collective level, on an industrial scale, corporate level, those changes are very difficult to implement. I mean, a really good example, I don't want to go on about Chinese cars too much, but, I have a Tesla Model 3 in the UK. Yes. and I downloaded the app and I went dib, 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 whatever you had to do. And I don't do apps very quickly. It worked instantly. It always works. It's never failed. It connects to the car instantly. I can control the car from the phone. It's so easy. It doesn't even, yes. I have had dozens of really well-known cars of press cars on short-term loan to review, to drive them. We've tried so many different ones. I can never get the app to work. It will not connect to the car.
If you think of it as a computer on wheels, then from the get-go, you know what you need to do, right? Yeah. If you think of it as just another ICE vehicle with a battery or whatever, then it's going to be painful. It's going to be painful to do, even something like over-the-air, updates, which Tesla had done 10 years ago, right? Yes. I mean, even those simple things, the folks are starting to do just now. It is painful.
Yeah. Painful is quite the understatement. I think in the absolute best case scenario, it's going to be excruciatingly painful. But in the more realistic scenario, the transition is simply going to prove to be fatal. The most remarkable thing of all is the fact that folks like Tony Seba, who are in the vast minority, have been banging the drum, screaming from the rooftops, trying to point out what is obvious and inevitable. Hey guys, these cost curves, they help us predict the future. They're reliable. They have predictive power. We can see what the future looks like. We can see what the future entails. We understand. Hello guys, please listen. Look, declining costs. These vehicles you think you're going to be producing in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they're going away. And these vehicles that will disrupt your business are not just ICE vehicles with a battery in them. They're computers on wheels. I find it absolutely baffling and embarrassing that executives, leaders within these automotive companies have ignored reality, ignored the inevitability of the transition to EVs, year after year after year after year, possibly relying on the incredibly stupid predictions of alleged experts who are anything but. And as a result of this incompetence, this blindness, and this unwillingness to use their brains and consider the implications, we now have a multi-trillion-dollar industry that's going to go up in a puff of smoke in this very decade. I hate to rain on everyone's parade, but it's already way too late. The vast majority of legacy automotive manufacturers will be filing for bankruptcy in the 2020s. There will be a few amalgamations, a few mergers, a few acquisitions, and most importantly, very few survivors. Those that do somehow defy the odds and miraculously make it into the 2030s will be shadows of their former selves. The world's largest automotive manufacturers today sell close to 10, approaching 11 million vehicles per year. Even if any of these current behemoths survive into the 2030s, they will be shadows of their former selves, selling a fraction of the vehicles as they previously did at their peak. Too slow, too dumb, too blind, too arrogant, and now they will pay the ultimate price. We're going to see multiple slow motion train wrecks throughout the rest of this decade. What's the saying? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Tony Seba has been doing his best to lead numerous horses to water over the last decade or so. That would be legacy automotive manufacturers. But unfortunately for these brain-dead horses, despite Tony's best efforts, they either didn't believe there was any water, or they didn't believe they needed water to survive. And as a result, they're not going to. And I guess while we're on the subject of well-meaning people attempting to lead horses to water, and it being up to the horses as to whether or not they drink, excuse me for a moment. What a perfect segue. Dear horse, I think you should drink Athletic Greens AG1 every day, as I've been doing for almost the last 2 years. Much like Tony Seba, just trying to help here. There's a valuable lesson in today's video. If you keep doing what you've been doing, you keep getting what you've been getting, sometimes with fatal consequences. My personal philosophy in life is to be proactive rather than reactive, a lesson legacy automotive manufacturers clearly haven't learned. I'm absolutely obsessed with optimizing my health, my energy, and my overall well-being, and Athletic Greens AG1 is one of the biggest tools in my toolkit. Much like cost curves can predict future outcomes, Athletic Greens AG1 really is a no-brainer. Just like it would have been a no-brainer for legacy automotive manufacturers to take a look at the data that Tony was trying to point out, the predictably declining cost curves back in the day, and go, you know what, there might be something in this. I kind of feel like a mini version of Tony Seba on a much smaller scale, but instead of trying to alert people to the fact that just because EVs are only 0.07% of the market this year, next year they might be 0.09% of the market, they're growing exponentially and will soon be 100% of the market. Let me make the case for daily use of Athletic Greens AG1. And I do speak from personal experience. This stuff is full of probiotics, prebiotics, and enzymes to help with digestion and nutrient absorption. It helps bolster your gut health, which can massively affect your mood and energy. AG1 also supports immunity, a fact I can personally attest to and historically demonstrate as true. I have not missed a daily video upload now for almost 3 years in a row. Now, it's true I don't record every single day, but when I travel, when I'm visiting friends and family, I still have enough energy to pre-record content. Haven't missed a daily upload. I think you'll be hard-pressed to find too many other people out there who have the ability to so sustainably and consistently produce work. The biggest benefit I've found, the one that's had the biggest impact on my ability to actually produce content, has been a massive boost in energy. As I've mentioned previously, I was experiencing afternoon fatigue. Like clockwork, every day around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, I felt incredibly tired, fatigued, just wanted to take a nap. That was before I began taking Athletic Greens AG1. Within a few weeks, I no longer experienced my afternoon fatigue. Absolutely vanished. And now I experience sustained energy throughout the day. My biggest challenge these days is using my energy up. Not only that, but AG1 also helps with recovery. Super important for anyone who isn't a fat slob and actually actively moves their body. Athletic Greens AG1 is packed with 75 high quality vitamins, minerals and whole food source nutrients. Great way to fill in nutritional gaps to promote gut health, immunity and boost overall energy and recovery. Best of all, there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. With the link in the pinned comment or heading to athleticgreens.com, you can unlock a 1-year free supply of vitamin D3 and K2. So, ladies and gentlemen, just doing my best to lead a few horses to water and hopefully, at least a few of them, will drink. Or, like legacy automotive manufacturers ignored reality and ignored the pleas from Tony Seba, you can do nothing as well. It's no skin off my nose. So consider this the water, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm encouraging you all to drink. I've led you there. I've shared my own personal experience. If you're a regular viewer, you'll have seen many testimonials. I ain't making this stuff up. Other people are having similar experiences themselves. The question is, now that you've been led to the water, will you drink? Or would you prefer to keep doing what you've been doing and keep feeling like you've been feeling? What are you waiting for? Head to athleticgreens.com/SMR or click the link in the pinned comment. Make AG1 part of your daily routine and let me know in a few weeks how you're feeling. And finally, if you're feeling like you can handle a little bit of butthurt and maybe getting triggered and mad, head over to Patreon and unlock almost 300 exclusive videos, including many spicy topics that I can't even discuss out loud here on YouTube. So, see you over on Patreon. Love ya.